Welcome to Write Now Workshop Podcast, where you can write a book and change the world. I'm your host, Kitty Bucholtz, and this is episode 228, After the First Draft, an interview with Ally Machate, coming to you on Thursday, December 24th, 2020. Merry Christmas! It's only a few hours away. I'm so excited. I love Christmas. It's one of my favorite times. Even though, we bought everything online this year. We both know exactly what the other person is getting us. And I'm still excited because I still love Christmas. And I love the lights and I love the possibility that just maybe it might snow where we live. Even though we live in Sweden, we live in the part that's near the Baltic Sea. So the air is a lot warmer and it hardly ever snows. But we had snow a few weeks ago, so fingers crossed, maybe it'll snow tomorrow. Then I'll be super duper happy. But in any case, there will be plenty of Christmas cookies and Christmas ham and writing too. Actually, John and I decided that even though it's Christmas vacation, it will be fun to just continue with our little writing habit that we've got going here. So great episode coming off the back of NaNoWriMo. After the first draft, what do I do now? And Ally talks about all sorts of great tips, things that will really genuinely help you to like do this. This is a great episode for you. It's a great episode for anybody who got to the end of the first draft and was like, oh my gosh, first of all, I need a break. And then after that, I need to get back to work on it. So I am sure you are going to find lots of great tips. If at the end you're like, you know what, I am kind of interested in what a book coach could help me to do better. Like, how could I get this done better or faster, or in what way could a book coach help? Reach out to me. I'm happy to talk to you about it and let you know how it would work if you wanted to work with me. Also, you could just Google book coaches if you're like, I like you as a podcaster, Kitty, but I don't know if I really want to work with you all the time, like on a not permanent, but anyway, if you have that idea in your head, you can just Google book coaches in general. I would be totally okay with that. The whole point is to finish our books, make sure that they are the best story that we could tell, the best nonfiction book that we can put together, and that they really move and affect our audiences in the way that we had hoped for. I mean, that's what we're working towards, right? So whatever it takes. And Ally is going to give you a lot of great advice. This whole month is our mini season on editing. So we've already had 3 more episodes, the last 3 episodes, all on editing. Then today and next week as well, Lisa Cron will be here, the author of Wired for Story and Story Genius, talking some more about editing. And it's going to be a really interesting dichotomy listening to Ally and I talk about all the things that we like about NaNoWriMo in this episode, and next week's episode, how Lisa says that it's the worst possible thing that you can do for your book. And I'm like, okay, well, all of her arguments made sense to me too. So it'll give you a lot of food for thought. And definitely the end of the year is a good time for food for thought, right? Especially having to do with something that you love, like your books and your writing. So I'm sure that you will find it all helpful. Remember that next week's episode will be the last episode of the year and the last episode of this season. So if you remember, I am starting to put the podcast into seasons for 2021, which means that the next episode will be starting again on Thursday, January 28th. And then we'll keep on running from there for a season, be off for a few weeks, have a season, be off for a few weeks, that sort of thing. So should be very interesting and fun. And I've got all sorts of great guests lined up. I'm so excited to share with you. And I think that was the last thing that I wanted to tell you. Yeah. Basically, happy holidays. I hope that you are having some nice, relaxing time off, that you're eating something absolutely fabulously delicious, and that the weather is whatever you expected and wanted it to be for whatever hemisphere you live in and whatever part of the world that you live in. To my friends in Australia, hello, happy summer vacation. And to my friends in Michigan, please enjoy the snow for me because I won't have that much. And my friends in California and Arizona, I don't love that weather for Christmas, but I do love the weather that you're having right now. So please enjoy it for me. There's something to be liked about everything, right? All right. So without further ado, I've been saying that a lot recently. Have you noticed that? I'll say it all like almost all the time now, right before the guest. Let me say it differently this time. So let me stop talking so that now we can listen to Ally talk. Happy writing, happy Christmas, and we will get right back into the interview now. Today's guest is Ally Machate. Ally is on a mission to make great books happen and help authors reach more readers. A best-selling author and expert publishing consultant, Ally has served both small and big five publishers, including Simon & Schuster, where she acquired and edited books for the Touchstone and Fireside imprints. Her client list includes authors publishing with such companies as Simon & Schuster, Penguin Random House, Rodale Inc., Chronicle Books, Kaplan Publishing, Source Books, Sunrise River Press, and Hay House, as well as independently published bestsellers. Ally leads a diversified team of professionals who specialize in helping serious authors fulfill their dreams of publishing success through writing, publishing, and selling more high-quality books. Get free gifts and learn more at thewritersally.com. Welcome, Ally.
Oh, thanks so much for having me, Kitty. It's my pleasure.
I'm so glad you're here. I've been excited to have you on. You and I have started getting to know each other in another life, and it's been super fun. So welcome.
Yeah, super fun.
Awesome. Well, so listen, I figured the best way to start this episode. So this is what we're doing. We are talking, you and I are talking in November, but the episode's going to come out in December. And my thought was we spend there's hundreds of thousands of people who spend a ton of time and energy during November writing as fast as I can so I can write a book in a month and be part of this, big group of people who are doing this thing. And I have to admit, I find it very fun. I'm a total sucker for gamification. So I went and looked to see in Nano, like, what are all the badges that I can earn and which ones am I determined to earn? So, the first day badge, 2 days in a row badge, 3 days in a row, 7 days in a row. There was like 5 of them. I'm like, I'm going to get these 5 badges for sure. And then if I feel like, because I have done Nano before where I just wrote no matter what, even if because people would say, just even type, I don't really know where the story's going, and then just brainstorm onto paper. And I had the worst time ever editing those books. It was terrible. I was like, I don't know where to start cutting and how much of this needs to be deleted, how much needs to go in the notes section. I'm like, this story doesn't make any sense by the end of the month. So I figured a month of talking about editing is only fair if we're going to do a whole month of just write as fast as we can, which does have its benefits. So I do feel like there's a lot of pros and cons. So with that being our general picture frame, let's start by just telling people a little bit more about you, your background, and the business that you're in right now.
Yeah, sure. So I will start off by saying I am a lifelong dedicated book nerd and word nerd. I've always loved reading. I've always been a writer myself, as well as wanting to be in the industry as an editor. I've always been a writer. I went to school, did joint degrees in English and creative writing all the way along. So I like to say that I really experienced both sides of the desk, and I was extremely fortunate. In the academic sense, but also in the professional sense, where I had a lot of experience. I got a lot of great internships. I worked for a very small regional publisher in upstate New York when I was in college that gave me a lot of great experience. And I was extremely fortunate to get a very coveted position at one of the big 5 at Simon & Schuster when I graduated right out of school, which at the time actually, I was very conflicted because I was really looking forward to having a summer off. After finishing college. Everyone would always say about publishing, I'm sure it's still true, but at least at the time, the jobs are extremely competitive. And everyone said, don't, expect it to take a while. So I expected it to take a while, and I thought I would have a nice vacation and I'd have some time off. And instead, I got actually very, very lucky, and my resume landed on the desk of an HR person who was very actively interviewing for a new position. And so I went down and had my interview during finals week, and I was hired right away. And I started with no break at all.
So did you get hired as an intern, or your internship became a job right away after?
No, I didn't intern at Simon & Schuster. I interned at the smaller publisher. The Simon & Schuster job was a job. I was hired as an editorial assistant. Yep.
Nice. Okay.
So in publishing, it was very much structured as sort of like an apprenticeship. So you come in as a young person and you are an assistant, you are an editorial assistant, and you're paired with a more senior editor. And I had the fortune of being an assistant to two really wonderful ladies, two editors who they themselves had just been promoted, and I was their first assistant.
Nice.
And working for two people was as hard as you can imagine. It was a lot of work, but it also meant that I got exposed to a ton of projects and experience and insight. And both of them worked on different kinds of books and were, different kinds of people. And I really just learned so much from that job, just real trial by fire kind of stuff. And then one of them went on maternity leave, and I ended up managing a lot of her list while she was gone. And when she decided not to come back, I took over a lot of her projects. So I really had a trial by fire. And
Wow.
I was also extremely fortunate to be in a department at the time when I first worked there. It was the adult trade paper division. It wasn't its own imprint yet. And the leadership was very supportive of its young people. It really, they encouraged us. We were invited to all of the meetings. There was no kind of like elitism of like, oh, you're just an assistant, like they wanted us to be involved in all parts of the process. They wanted us to learn. They wanted us to take on as much as we could handle. And I actually ended up acquiring my first book before I had been there for a year. It was like before my first anniversary. So yeah, just wonderful, incredible, all around, great experience, and a really great place to learn and build an early career. And so I was there and started to build my list and moved up, and eventually a series of unfortunate events happened in the world. We had the .com bust, and then we had 9/11, and New York and publishing was no exception, just kind of shrank. A lot of industries were shrinking, and a lot of positions were eliminated. The opportunities really became reduced, and the burden on those of us who were left was increased because, of course, we were still publishing the same number of books with, half the staff. So it just became a very difficult situation. And I thought, well, I'm almost finished with my master's degree, which I've been doing part-time, and I'm feeling kind of stuck. Maybe now's a good time to try finishing school and doing some freelancing.
All right.
So that's what I did. I went off and I finished my degree, and I did some freelancing on the side. And I fully intended to come back into mainstream publishing. I figured, give it a year and a half, things will start looking up again. There'll be more opportunities for movement. And instead, I loved what I was doing so much. I was freelance editing first. At the time, I was a developmental editor, and I just loved it. So I kept doing it. And that was almost 20 years ago.
Wow. So you've been working on your own this whole time. Yeah.
Nice. Well, I haven't been on my own. I'm sorry, I'm giving the wrong numbers. I've been in the industry more than 20 years. I've been on my own a little bit less than that, but yeah, it's been a long time.
Yeah. And obviously, you liked it enough to continue working on your own, but then this is very exciting and interesting to me. You actually built up a company that has several, I don't even know how many, it sounded like quite a few editors who work under you, and you're the CEO of your company. Tell us a little bit about
the
that.
Writer's Ally. Yeah, sure. So, when maybe you don't know, some people who have, anyone who has ever worked independently knows that especially when you're first starting out, you say yes to a lot of different kinds of things because, of course, you're trying to build a business and make a living. So I did a lot of developmental editing, and then I started to try other things. I did some content writing, and that inevitably led to me doing some book doctoring and some ghostwriting. And the more ghostwriting and book doctoring that I did, book doctoring is when a publisher or an agent has a project under contract usually, and the project comes in and it just needs way more help than they can give it. Usually it's the case where an author needed a ghostwriter and didn't have one.
Okay.
So they'll bring someone in to sort of redo the manuscript. So I was doing a lot of that kind of work, the sort of big project type stuff. And I found that I was booking further and further into the future, months and months ahead. And I reached a point, inevitably, where people didn't want to wait anymore.
Yeah.
They really wanted to work with me, but I just couldn't work with them for too long into the future. And so I started experimenting with different business models and, different kinds of partnerships and referral networks and different types of things. And eventually I felt like, I really had built up a network of people that trusted me. I was doing a lot of speaking engagements and articles and things like that. And I just felt like if somebody trusted me and they were coming to me because they wanted to work with me and they trusted my advice and what I thought their book needed, that I didn't want to just keep sending them somewhere else. And so I thought, well, I actually really am getting a little bit bored of the work itself. I had been editing and ghostwriting and doing all this stuff for years and years and years. I wanted to try something new. And I thought, well, building a business is a whole new challenge.
Yeah.
And I liked it. I really liked the idea of learning about marketing and building systems and, SOPs and things that many people find really unsexy. Like I find really cool. And I met more and more professionals who felt the opposite. They were very talented editors, very talented copywriters, but they hated the business stuff. They hated the marketing. They hated organizing themselves. They hated, following up to get endorsements and things like that. So I decided to build a team, to replicate myself, as they say, to clone myself. And I started partnering and bringing in these other editors so that when we had a client, we could serve them regardless of what they needed. If they were interested in traditional publishing, we would be able to help them edit their manuscript, their book proposal, query letter. If they decided to self-publish, we would be able to continue, through a production process with copy editing and cover design and layout and proofreading and all that good stuff. So I've been doing that for about 6 years now.
Nice. Wow. Okay. That really does sound very exciting to me. As somebody who is similar but different, I always assumed that I would go to business school and, I was like, oh, should I go to someplace like Harvard or something? And, then you're a sophomore and a junior in high school and you're looking at all the places and everything seems possible to you, because you're 16.
Right.
And I was like, oh, well, apparently, according to the literature, Harvard is where you go if you want to be CEO of like a Fortune 500 company. But Wharton is where you go if you want to create a Fortune 500 company.
Oh, yeah. That's so funny. I've never heard that, but that's so true.
Yeah. So I went to the Wharton School of Business my first year of college because I was like, I'm going to create my own company someday, and had really no doubt that it would happen. And it did, but not at all, in the Wharton Business School sort of way.
Yeah.
More like you. I mean, all of us, I think, all the writers who are listening, who are realizing, I just realized I've started a business because I'm going to be publishing more than one book. You sort of fall into things because you start doing something that you like, and then it just keeps growing, right?
Yeah, I think that's very true. And I mean, it's probably very different for people who are, young and just sort of emerging into the work landscape now than it was for us. But, I don't think that any of us generally were aware that these kinds of opportunities existed, or maybe they didn't even really exist in such quantity then. I mean, the internet existed, but it wasn't the internet, the way that it is now. I mean, I was definitely one of those very annoying people who grew up and got her dream job. I always wanted to work in book publishing. I always wanted to work with authors. I always wanted to write. But I definitely never imagined that would be something I could do on my own.
Yeah.
I mean, the writing part, yes, but not the, editing and
Yes.
making books.
Yeah.
And the idea of doing all of that online, especially, is something I don't think ever really crossed my mind when I was young.
And I would imagine every once in a while you hear somebody else read your bio out loud like we just did, and you're like, wow, that's me. Wow.
It's so true. Every time I say I've been in the book publishing industry for more than 20 years, I'm like, Jesus, really?
Yeah. Yeah.
Just, hey, right? How can that be right?
Yeah.
It's just crazy. But but it's been, I've really led a blessed existence work-wise. I've gotten to do so many things and work with so many amazing people and do what I love. I mean, different iterations of it, Now I'm not the one who's editing. I'm creating group programs and working with authors on book marketing, but I'm still the person that helps make that happen, right? That helps pair them with the right editor and get their cover done and, all of that. And then there's a book at the end of it. And you've helped change, you've not only helped change that author's life because they're so happy that this thing they've been pouring their blood, sweat, and tears into is manifested into a physical product, but then that book goes on to touch other people. And you were a part of that. I mean, what's cooler than that?
I know, right? It is wonderful. Well, and we're going to take advantage of the coolness and the 20 years. So we're going to segue into, you have probably heard just about every different kind of story about how a book was written. I wrote this book 2 weeks ago and now it's done. I wrote this book over the last 15 years and now it's done. So you've seen a whole lot of different kinds of problems that probably over time kind of coalesce into groups of very similar problems. So feel free to really start wherever you want, but let's look at it from the perspective of, feel free to organize in your head however you want. We've got some people listening who are still writing their first book. Other people listening have already had 40 books published, but every book is still a brand new blank page. So there's a certain amount of similarity and I got to do it again. So tell us about what your thoughts and experiences are around the, I'm getting through my rough draft, and then what do I do as far as editing, self-editing, or sending things to an editor?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about Nano, since you mentioned, NaNoWriMo, and probably there are a lot of people who are coming off the heels of that, or maybe even just wondering about it, thinking about doing it next time. I have done Nano myself a few times. I've only won once, I think. When you win a Nano, right, you write 50,000 words at least, you hit that mark.
Right.
I think it's a wonderful, wonderful event, and I highly encourage people to try it. It's fun, and especially if you're like me and you have a very, very robust inner editor who's constantly trying to comment on what's coming out. And if that freezes you, if that causes you problems in trying to create, Nano is awesome because you have no time to self-critique or self-edit. It's purely get the words down on the page as fast as you can so that you can hit the word count and keep up and win at the end of the month. And that process really enables you to turn off that part of your brain and really create something beautiful and messy. And I think as many of you listening probably have experienced, that's what creation is, right? It's not a fully formed, beautiful book that just needs like a spell check emerging from your head. It's not. It's scenes and it's character sketches and it's dialogue and it's notes to yourself and it's, it's a mess. It's a mess.
Yeah.
So Nano sort of lights the fire under your butt and gives you creates a container and a space for that, which is wonderful. So what do you do when you get to the end of it? Whether you've done Nano or you just created it on your own, you have this draft now. And what the hell do you do next? And I always tell people that the very first thing I strongly recommend anybody do when they have finished writing a draft, which I think sounds counterintuitive to a lot, is to stop writing and put the damn thing away. Put it away. I don't think there's any magic number. I think you have to experiment with what works best for you. But I recommend at least a week, especially if you're a new writer, for sure. A full week, put that sucker away. Don't look at it. Don't think about it. If you can help it, don't talk about it. Like pretend it doesn't exist, because what you're trying to do is to give yourself the space to have what we call fresh eyes, right? Like you've been nose deep in whatever it is you've been working on, whether it's the last 30 days for Nano or the last, 30 months or the last, 15 years, however long it's been, you've been, up to here with that material. And before you can effectively go back and start to see the things that need to be done and understand the work that you're going to need to do to finish that book, really, you need to get that perspective. You need to get a little bit of that fresh eye, that objectivity. And the best way to do it is to create some space. So put it away, walk away, give it a week, and then come back. And first of all, I promise you that you will be shocked at how different it feels reading a draft that you have not looked at or thought about for at least a week.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's really where I would start. And then the second really important thing that I think you want to do with a draft, especially a nano draft, which is messier than most,
Yeah.
is you want to take stock of what you have. So I always encourage people, now that you've come back to it freshly, get out your favorite, like whatever note-taking method. If you like to write in longhand, if you prefer to use, like Microsoft Word's comments feature, whatever you want to do, read the thing through start to finish. Just read it. Don't start rewriting yet. Don't start judging yourself. Don't worry about the commas. Just read it and make notes to yourself as you go. So what you'll start to notice now that you're have a little bit of distance, hopefully you're coming back and you're reading it. You're not looking for the little nitpicky things. A lot of authors, especially new authors, will get really stuck at this point because they think that revision or editing is like fiddling with spelling or changing a word here or there, or, messing with the punctuation, line editing. And that's important. That's absolutely important. But that's very much end stage stuff. In the beginning, what you're really dealing with are the big picture issues, right? So if it's a novel, you're looking for things like making sure that your plot has a clear sense of progression and that there's one main plot.
Yeah.
Right? You might have subplots. But, if you're reading this draft and it doesn't make sense because you have no idea what this story is, that's a problem. That's big picture. If you have characters coming in and out of the story that disappear, if you realize you started going down a certain path for a subplot and then just never finished, just left it there, just never finished.
Yeah.
Those are the kinds of notes. Those are the things you're looking for. You want to make notes to yourself. Like, oh, I thought I was going over here, but I decided it didn't make sense. So we're going to have to write this part out. Or, oh, you know what? I still think that's a great idea, but I kind of dropped it. Let's see if I can, work that subplot back in. Whatever it is, make all those notes. If it's nonfiction, it's not going to be about plot and character. It's going to be about things like the structure of your process or system. Are all the important key points that you're taking your reader through their process of transformation, are all of those present? Are they logical? Are they in the right order? You might look for places where a story or an exercise might be a useful way to get your point across, a complex idea across, something like that. So I recommend that you take the time, read it all the way through, make all those notes, and that way you can really see what you have.
Yeah.
Really, really look at your material, see what it's trying to be. And again, especially when you're doing something like nano, where the key is speed, you're just writing. Sometimes we start nano, you don't even know what you're writing. Like some people come to the table with an outline and a plan. Some people just jump in on November 1st and go.
Yeah.
So it's good to take a beat and see what actually came out. And then think about what it is you want it to be now. Nano's over. You don't have anybody to please but yourself. What is this book trying to be? What have you actually written? Don't worry about what you were trying to write so much, right? What did you actually write?
So if you've
and
got,
what do you like about it?
Yeah. So if you've got 6 chapters, it's total murder mystery. And then she meets the guy, and then it becomes more and more and more love story for another 10 chapters. Then you need to understand what you're looking at here and ask yourself, do I really want to write like a romantic suspense and combine these two? Or did one of them really not work and I really wanted it to be the other one and I didn't know that, right?
Exactly true. And I think it's good to look at what you're working on in the context also of what you read. Oftentimes we tend, especially new writers, will write in the genres and the categories that they read a lot. People who read a lot of self-help often feel compelled to turn in an experience that they've had into a self-help book. People who, love to read murder mysteries often write murder mysteries. So, don't be embarrassed by that. Like if you thought you wanted to be ambitious and write a literary novel and you ended up writing something that's more like a romance novel, but you like romance, embrace that. That's fine, right? Nobody's judging you. Write what you want to write.
Yeah.
But be conscious of what you want to write. The writing process and the revising process are very distinct. And now that you've written it, now that you've drafted it, in some sense, this, perhaps is not welcome news, but in some sense, this is the hard part.
Yeah.
Writing was the hard part. And certainly it can be very difficult to write a draft. But what's that saying? It's Einstein's famous saying something about it being like 2% inspiration and 98% perspiration or something like that.
Yeah.
Applies to writing a book just as much as anything else. So you've written it, you've got it all down, and now it's time to take that clay, take that raw material, and turn it into something. So then the third step I would recommend that people take is, if you did not start with an outline, I strongly recommend creating one at this point. And the point of creating it now, even if you didn't write with one in the first place, is because we're looking to get clarity on the skeleton of the book, the structure, right? So if you imagine that your draft is all the raw material that gets hung on the skeleton, you want to have a really clear sense of what that skeleton looks like, so that you know where everything best fits or doesn't fit, as the case may be. So, if you have an outline, I recommend that you look at your outline, look at what you've written, and adjust one or both. Sometimes, again, like you start with a certain idea and your inspiration just takes you somewhere else, and that's cool. So, adjust your outline to suit what you've written, if that's the case. Or if you didn't have one at all and you're just looking at this kind of disaster, you'll start to get a much better handle on the elements of your story and the progression of your character arcs and all of these different things, if you have that outline and you are clear about where all the pieces are going to fit. And I would definitely say, for those of you listening who are super new, if I'm talking about things like patterns of conflict and resolution, and Freytag's triangle, and where your climax should be, and what your denouement should look like, and how to write an engaging opening, and if I'm talking about all of these things and this is all Greek to you, I also strongly recommend that you pick up at least one book on basic story structure. We as humans have a really strong innate sense of story, and stories are all around us in many forms all the time. But there are elements, I don't necessarily like to use the word formula, because I think people unfairly associate that with negative things, like something is formulaic, right? It's not good because it's formulaic. But the truth is that all good stories, and in nonfiction, it's more of a transformative journey. It's not a narrative. It's a little different, but all good stories have certain elements in common that make them appealing to humans, that make them work.
Right.
Doesn't matter what kind of story it is. All stories have these very basic elements. So if you just purely written from a place of creativity and you've just let it flow and you let it come out, that's awesome. That is a great way to start. If that works for you, if that's part of your process, cool. But now it's time to learn how those pieces fit together for other people. Right. If you want other people to read it.
Yeah, because as much as the journey of writing is beautiful and just like on the inside of you, so much is happening. If your goal is to have other people read it, then at some point you need to have pivoted enough that you're like, my goal is now to take what was all about what I wanted to say and make sure that it reaches other people at the place where I'm trying to reach them.
That is so well put. Yes, that is exactly right. Absolutely. And that shift can be really hard. So, respect that it's very much like taking off one hat and putting on another. And and we're not even talking about publishing, right? Whether or not you're going into a literal business and creating, your own company and publishing your own books or not. Just the difference between being that craftsperson, that artist who's creating it, and then shifting. You're still sort of in the craftsman mode when you're revising, but you start to get a little more business oriented too, because as you mentioned, it's time to start thinking about, what category does my book fit into? Yeah. What do readers of that category expect? I don't care how groundbreaking you think you are. If you try to sell a romance novel where the two leads don't end up together in the end, you failed. No one's going to buy that book.
Yeah. Not as a romance.
Romance reader, not as a romance. Romance readers are going to be really, really pissed off if they get to the end of a romance and one of the characters dies. That is no longer a romance novel.
Yeah, which is why
you need to know that.
Yes, yes. Which is why if you didn't know who Nicholas Sparks was until you read his first book or watched the first movie, you were shocked and appalled when one of the two characters died. And you're like, but you can't have a romance where someone dies. And then he gets interviewed and he's like, I never said I was writing a romance.
That's right. The big difference between books that have romantic elements and a romance novel.
Right, right. Okay, so let's just do a quick recap. So finish your first draft and then put it aside for at least a week. Then read it either on paper or on your screen and take notes, and just read it and take notes. Don't try to change anything. And then number 3 was now look at the manuscript and all of your notes and try to formulate an outline of what you think now that the story really is that you're trying to write. Yeah. And make sure that you also understand either in fiction or nonfiction, the structure of the kind of book that you're writing. And if that means going and finding a book and buying it and reading it so that you know what to do next, then make sure you do that.
Yeah. Yeah. Now's the time to get technical, right? So it's adding that layer of being a technician on top of being purely artistic.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So now people are going to be thinking, so now do I send it to an editor, or is there more?
Well, I mean, it's a little different for everyone. If you are, as you mentioned, some people maybe have published 40 books already. If that's you, your draft is probably much more advanced than someone who's just writing their first book.
Your cat's
Excuse me for
busy.
that noise. My cat has just found a ball. The joys of working from home. So yeah, you want to take that time. You have that draft, figure out what it is that you're writing, and now it's time to make it the very best you can make it. So you could send it to an editor at this point, right? When I get drafts that are what I call raw material. So let's very, very loosely define stages. We have the raw material, we have a rough draft, then we have what I would call a true first draft, and then multiple revisions till you get to your final draft.
Okay.
So you get to the end of Nano, that's a great example of raw material.
Okay.
Right? Half of it doesn't make sense. You wrote it super fast. It's bits and pieces. It's, half a page of all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy. Like it's just raw material. The rough draft is after you write that outline and you have a better handle on how to start pulling this together and where the holes are and all of that. Once you have something that certainly is far from finished and perfect, but that is at least cohesive, now you have your first rough draft. It's complete, right? It's all there. It's no longer a pastiche of scenes. It's a story, or it's a self-help guide or whatever it is. So once you have a rough draft, you definitely could send it to an editor. When I get drafts like that, though, I generally try to encourage the author to either do some more work on it themselves or participate in some kind of group feedback. So I'm a huge fan of critique groups, or even one good critique partner. So another writer, right? Not your spouse, not somebody who's legally obligated to be nice to you. Someone else who writes, and hopefully, ideally, someone else who writes something similar to what you're writing.
Yeah.
Something in the same category, or at least both fiction or both nonfiction,
Yeah. I just want to mention the reason why that part is important. I one time got together with a bunch of people where I live here. As far as we knew, we were the only writers that we knew of. So we all got together, we all wrote different things, and we were all like, well, okay, that'll probably work out. But during one of the sessions where they were critiquing some chick lit that I had written, the one person gave me all of her feedback, which didn't make any sense at all to me, and then ended with, never actually read chick lit, so I'm hoping that's helpful. And I'm thinking,
right,
I love you guys, but I'm never going to do this again.
Yeah. exactly. A good critique partner can be helpful no matter what, but the best results are going to be with somebody who actually is reading and writing in your category. And the reason I mention that on a rough draft is because an editor, think of an editor as somebody helping you to take your book up a level. So if you come to an editor with a D manuscript, they might be able to help you get it to a C, maybe a B, right? But if you can come to them with a C or a B manuscript, they can help you get it to that A or A plus, right? In fewer rounds. And especially when we're talking about working with a freelance editor where you're paying out of pocket, every one of those rounds is going to cost you more money.
Yeah.
So there's also a financial component, right? It's both practical from the perspective of doing the work and giving the editor more to work with. You don't want them to be distracted by the fact that you have subplots that don't go anywhere and characters who disappear and things that don't make sense. That's not what you want your editor to focus on. You want your editor to focus on, oh, okay, the plot and the subplots are clear. But, if we refine this subplot a little bit more, it will really resonate and support this part of the plot in a really beautiful way that makes this theme really, really strong throughout the story. Or, I can see how you've got this character going through this, this particular arc of development. But if we took out this part of it and emphasized this part of it, well, now all of a sudden this character really feels multidimensional and interesting and authentic. And now we're really rooting for her, right? You want them to dig deep into how to make the story sing, not get distracted because they can't figure out what you're trying to say.
Yeah.
So yes, you could hire an editor. I generally recommend that you wait and use those other resources first. Do as much as you can on your own, then start to get objective feedback from some people that you can trust and rely on, such as a critique group or a critique partner, other writers, a workshop scenario, something like that. And when you've gone through that, when you've gotten that feedback, when you feel like you have made it as good as you can, either you can still see the holes, but you don't know how to fix them. You have some haunting sense of like, it's good, but it's not as great as I can sort of see in my mind's eye, right? You have this vision for it being this kind of book. Maybe you're not quite there yet. That's when you want to hire someone. You've done everything you possibly can. You're just left fiddling with, word choice, right? You're not dealing with the big picture stuff anymore. That's when it's time to hire an editor.
Excellent. Okay. Now, not that we're necessarily pitching you, but we're not pitching you. I think everybody who's going to be on the show in December has something that they have a business for writers. And that is why you are on the show, because you know that of which you speak. You understand the kind of help that people need at the various stages. So you or someone like you, let's say someone's like, okay, how do I find the right person for me? Because we've all heard the stories, and I'm sure you being on the other side of the desk as well, to be the editor who found the authors that you love to work with, or to be the author who found the editor that you love to work with, like, seems to be such a gift. And then when you listen some people's stories, it's a gift that doesn't happen all that often. So how do you find the right editor then who will help you be able to take your book? Like sometimes, so I've got 8 titles out, and sometimes I'm thinking, I just want to be better than I am now. Like, I write really good books, but I want to write amazing books. But I'm sure that once I write amazing books, I'll be like, I want to write outstanding books. So how do you find the person who is who's kind of gonna see what you're trying to do, even if you're not even really sure? Sometimes that seems to be like the experience of the perfect author-editor relationship. What's your experience? You've been on both sides of the desk. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, a really good collaborative relationship between a writer and an editor is like magic. Absolutely. And as a writer, I've done ghostwriting. Worked on, my own short projects, article projects, things like that. I've worked with a variety of editors. And when you have somebody who makes your work better, it's so fulfilling and so exciting, right? To be shown something you didn't even see.
Yeah.
And I, speaking as a professional, I can say too, even professionals need editors, right? Like the best writers in the world, you will still find them singing the praises of their editors and the acknowledgments or in interviews for a very good reason. And in part, it's because the human brain simply can't be fully objective about the things it creates.
Yeah.
You created something, and you can learn to be more objective. I mean, that is a skill set of a professional editor. Of course, it is something I learned to be objective. But even I can't be perfectly objective about my own work. And
Yeah.
I will never have purely fresh eyes because I made it.
Yeah. And
so,
to be clear, we're talking about, you might think your work is better than it is, or you might think it's worse than it is.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. Both ways. Absolutely true. There might be something that you weren't so sure about. You weren't sure it was coming across clearly enough. One very common thing that we see with a lot of new authors is there will be a lot of redundancy, or they'll almost, beat a dead horse because they are trying to accomplish something sophisticated, and they have insecurity about whether or not it's coming across, whether or not the reader's going to get it.
Yeah.
Right. So they overdo it because they're afraid that the reader's not going to get it. The editor says, no, trim this, perfect.
Yeah.
That can absolutely be very gratifying as well. And certainly we want to know what we're doing wrong or where we have weaknesses so that we can do better. But, it's actually a part of our philosophy with the Writer's Ally, I think is very important. And I always tell potential clients this, that we also want to encourage writers by showing them where their natural strengths lie. I think we all have sort of innate talents or practice talents where, maybe somebody just has a flair for dialogue, or they have a really good instinct for where to start a scene or something like that. It's really important for an author to know what those things are as well, so that they can do more of the things they're naturally good at while they're working on the things they're not so good at. So yeah, an editor can and should do both of those things. So how do you find this person? Gosh, I think one of the things that's very, very important that people understand is that there are different kinds of editors. Many times authors hear, well, you need an editor. And so they just go off in search of an editor. And then they hire an editor. And then what they get back is basically correction of, let's say, punctuation and grammar. And they think, oh, I hired an editor. I edited my book is done. Well, what they don't realize is what they hired was a copy editor, right? A copy editor works on the technical level. So a copy editor is going to certainly grammar, punctuation, spelling, basic issues of clarity and consistency throughout the book. And while good copy editors often have the experience, they're smart people. Certainly they're capable of saying, hey, this plot point doesn't make sense, or hey, like you were explaining this thing and I don't really understand what you're explaining. They generally aren't commenting on those things. It's not what a copy editor does, because a copy editor is usually the last stage of an editorial process before you go into design and production. They're not developmental editors. Developmental editors work on those big picture type stuff that I was talking about earlier. They're looking at the plot, the narrative, the themes, the character development. For nonfiction, they're looking at the promise of the book, how well it's speaking to the target audience, how well you're taking the reader through their journey. Are they getting wins along the way, that kind of thing. So if you go out and you hire a copy editor and you don't get that developmental help, what you're going to end up with is a very technically polished and correct manuscript, perhaps of a lousy book.
It could happen, right?
It could happen. And I have met, sadly, many, many, many authors over the years who have made that very mistake. They wanted the developmental feedback, and they didn't understand that the person they were hiring wasn't capable of giving it to them, or that just wasn't what they were paying for. And then when they finally realized it, it's a waste of money. They've thrown out a couple $1,000s maybe on getting this edit that really didn't need to happen yet, that didn't give them what they needed. And that ultimately isn't helpful, because if you end up rewriting a manuscript, what good was all of that correcting?
Yeah. Because now you've rewritten those perfectly technically correct areas.
Exactly. So I think it's really important to understand what kind of editing you're looking for, what kind of editor you're looking for, so that you can make sure the person you're talking to or considering has the right kind of experience for what it is that you want. And that sort of plays into the second piece that I think is a really important thing for people to understand if they're looking to hire a freelance editor, is that experience really matters. So you talked about, having that person who's going to help you take a good book and make it a great book, making an outstanding book, take it to that next level, see the things that you don't see, right?
Yeah.
That comes from experience. That comes from reading and editing many, many, many books in a category, and also outside of a category. As we talked about, there are certain shared elements. If you are hiring somebody who used to be a newspaper copy editor, unfortunately, there are many such folk who were turned loose in the last 5 to 10 years as newspapers have shrunk. If you used to be, if you're hiring someone and their background is that they were a newspaper copy editor, they may not be able to give you the kind of feedback you need to make that good book a great book. They might be capable, because they are sharp, smart people, of making a rough book into a decent book. But if you want that extra layer, if you want that person who's going to really find those opportunities in your draft and see you as a writer and see what you're capable of and help you get there, you need someone who has experience in your category. So you want someone who's done developmental editing, who's, worked with whatever your type of book is. Similarly, if you're writing mystery thriller, you need someone who understands the structure of a mystery thriller, who knows how to put together a whodunit, who can drop clues and deal with red herrings, and who understands how all of that works.
Right.
What those audience expectations are. You don't want a science editor to help you with your mystery thriller novel. You don't want a romance editor necessarily to help you with your weight loss book. These books are different. The audiences have different expectations. The genres have different requirements.
Yeah.
And, again, it's not to say that somebody may not have talent as an editor or may not be a very smart person with a sharp eye. They may be able to tell you a lot of things that are very helpful. But everything is proportional. And if they don't have the right kind of experience because you didn't understand what you were really looking for, you might hopefully have a good experience, but more likely than not, you're going to be in that latter category of all these poor folks that we constantly hear these stories about, where they're upset because, their expectations and what they received were not in alignment.
And I often feel like it's easier to understand if you draw a parallel. So for instance, I am known in circles far and wide to be the world's worst cook. I'm terrible. I am just terrible in the kitchen. It's shocking when I make something that turns out. I have to take a picture of it and send it to my husband. And then he says, "Who are you and where's my wife?" But I can make you think about maybe that you should cry after eating something I've baked, because I'm very, very good at that. So just like if somebody came to me and asked for some advice on cooking, I might be great at baking and it seems like it would be the same thing, and it's totally not. And I can try, and I might be able to make you better by virtue of, I don't know, understanding how to read a recipe. And that might be the extent of what I can do to help you cook. Because if you had come to me for baking, that would have been a totally different thing that I could absolutely help you with. And that's kind of, I'm always looking for analogies so people can start to see a picture in their mind of this is what we mean. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a great analogy. Absolutely. Somebody can be extremely talented at a particular type of editing or a particular type of book. Doesn't mean they totally suck at the other thing, but they're not going to be as good. And then that factors into things like price, right? Like it might be fine. If you have a smaller budget and you're working with somebody who's less experienced, but who seems to really get what you're trying to do. Maybe they've read a little bit of the book and you're having a conversation about it, and or maybe they've worked with a friend of yours and you just feel really confident about it. And if the price is reasonable, if it's proportional, right, the price is commensurate with experience and that fits for your budget, that's not to say you shouldn't do it, but to be aware of the choices that you're making and know what to expect.
Excellent. Well, this is brilliant. And now we have gone beyond the time that you told me it would be great if you could be done so you can get back to some other work. Is there any last things that you want to add? I don't want to have stopped you in the middle of a thought, but I think we've done a
Oh
pretty good
gosh,
job.
no, I think we have done a pretty good job. I think one last thing I would say about finding a good editor is this is where it starts to become, a little, we'll call it self-helpy, right? You have to start to be really honest with yourself about who you are as a writer and as a person. It can be extremely terrifying to take something that you've created that's very personal to you, especially if it's, say, a memoir or an autobiographical novel, and to show that to someone else. And not just to show it to someone else, but to show it to someone else with the express purpose of having them tear it apart, right? And like tell you all the things that aren't great about it. That's very scary, and it can be really hard. And again, even as a professional, I will tell you, when I have gotten material back from editors, and even though it's, I'm at a certain level at this point, I'm not getting certain kinds of comments, right? It's constructive, but it's certainly, the work is there. But even still, when somebody doesn't get what you were trying to do, or thinks something that you did doesn't work, or whatever it is, they're giving you commentary. Even professionals, we have that initial response, right? You get defensive and you get upset, and they're like, they think it sucks. Like, it's the whole thing. Totally normal to feel like that. But the difference between an amateur and a professional is being able to recognize that's, first of all, it's a perfectly human, normal, emotional response, but it's not truth.
Yeah. Right?
To be able to feel those feelings and then set them aside and say, okay, now what is this person saying? Is this something I really need to look at? Is this something I really need to fix? Is this perhaps debatable? Maybe I get on the phone and we talk through it, and then they realize, oh, okay, now I do get it. Maybe if you just need this one change, it would be clearer. Or no, sorry, I really don't think that's working. And let's, get deeper into why it's not working. And then maybe I'm convinced, that they were right. You need to be able to put that aside. And in the process of looking for an editor, it's good if you can have some sense of how you like to take your medicine, so to speak. Some editors will be very honest with you, and they'll say, look, I'm blunt. That's my style. I'm blunt and I'm critical. And if you want someone to go in there and tear it up and, tell you everything that needs to be fixed and to be really hard on you because that's what you respond to, then I'm the right editor for you. Someone might say that. That's not my style, but there are people who work that way.
Yeah.
Other editors can be super, super encouraging. In my opinion, sometimes there's a risk of being so encouraging that you're no longer being helpful enough.
Yeah.
But if you're a new writer and this is the first time you've ever had someone critique your work, and you're just very new to the whole process, maybe that's better for you. Maybe it's okay to have someone who's on this first round anyway, just going to be really encouraging. And maybe they're not going to dig into things as much as you need, but you would do that on the next round, ease into it a little bit. That's okay. So it's good to know that about yourself, so that when you're talking to editors, when you're interviewing people, you can ask about their style. If you look at a sample, you can sort of see, how their approach is. There are just as many styles of editing, I think, as there are of writing. So if you know a little bit more about what works well for you, then there's a better chance that you can find someone who's going to be a good fit for you.
Excellent. That is great advice. That's perfect ending advice. Well, listen, thank you so much. Where can people find you and more about your company, The Writer's Ally, and resources that you have made available to writers?
Yeah, so our website is the best place to start, thewritersally.com. We have a free checklist right on the homepage, the nine steps to making sure your book is ready to publish, to make sure you are ready to publish. So that's a free download you can sign up and get. And there's little free things. There's a blog, lots of articles. And when you're ready, there's a contact form. So you can fill out the contact form, and that will get you into our system, and you'll be invited to schedule a free phone consultation with me. I think it's really important to start the process with a phone call so that we can talk about your goals and your experience, and I can look at the project. We also have a free Facebook group called the Writers Allies. So, if you're just dipping your toe in, if your draft isn't finished yet, you're not quite ready, I would invite you to come and join us in that group. People are very friendly, lots of sharing of resources, people requesting manuscript trades and beta reads and things like that. So we would love to see you there in the meantime.
Nice. Perfect. Because that's where you might be able to find someone who, like you were saying, you can become beta readers together. Like they write something similar to you, and so you can help each other.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
Brilliant. Awesome.
Collaboration really is the name of the game. Writing is, I think it's a little bit of a misnomer that, you write in solitude, but you revise and publish in community.
Yeah. Yeah. And just to be clear, although we're talking to you, Ally, the head of the company, you actually have several editors who work for you who specialize in different ways and have different kind of editing personalities like you were describing. So when somebody calls and has a phone call with you, you're going to ask them a lot of questions and think about whether or not one of the people who work for you could really be a great match with this person. And if not, you'll be like, I don't know. I don't think that any of my people, could really help you with this genre. We're not familiar enough to help you. You would actually be able to say, I don't think we can help you, or I think that this person might be able to help you.
Yeah, absolutely right. That's a big part of what I do on that call. It's a big part of my role now is matchmaking. And my team, so you can see many of the people I work with the most regularly are on the website. So you can learn a little bit about who those editors are. And then I have a slightly more expanded network beyond that. But it's still a small group. We're talking about, 10 to 15 people at any given time. So it's not some big database. I know everybody on the team. I know them well. And when I speak to authors, that is absolutely one of the things I'm considering is who on the team would be a really good fit for this project and a really good match for this author. And absolutely, I mean, the beauty of having a team is we have people who specialize in almost everything. But sure, it happens occasionally that somebody has a project that they just need something more specialized, or it has a certain flavor that just isn't quite right for anybody on the team. And then, I'm happy to make whatever recommendations I can.
Awesome. That is awesome. Ally, this has been great. I hope people have been taking notes. You actually gave several, there was the 4 immediate steps and then several great steps after that. So everybody, if you're, riding or driving, I said, there's funny. My sister is a writer. She works with horses and I'm a writer. And in Michigan, we pronounce the word the same. So she's a writer and I'm a writer. So I meant to say, if you are riding, like riding your bicycle or something, or walking or running, go home, take some notes. This is great stuff. Ally, thank you so much for taking the time. We really appreciate all the help.
It's absolutely my pleasure. And, you guys out there who are revising that crazy nano draft, just hang in there, embrace the journey. And this is writing more than many other activities is absolutely that whole embrace the journey. It's not a destination thing. So have fun.